The 55th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is today. It is also the day where Donald Trump will receive a formal arraignment of the indictment, multiple indictments. First time in the history of our nation, a former president is criminally charged. Let me go back to Dr. King. Everybody is now just very celebratory as it relates to Dr. King, his legacy, his message, his ideology, his policy. What are they? You see, 95% of Americans actually say Dr. King was good for the nation today. But when Dr. King was living and actually being good for the nation while physically on this earth, did 95% of Americans believe he was good for the nation? No. There's a lot to the background. What I want to do is provide a clip, a segment, 11 months before the assassination of Dr. King. Here's what he said.
Was there something hypocritical about the fact that the South existed and the North could point the finger? And then when the Civil Rights Acts were passed in the early 60s, you couldn't point the finger anymore?
Well, there was no doubt about the hypocrisy of large segments of the nation on the whole question of racial equality. I think the best example is that many of the senators from the North and the West, and congressmen generally, who voted for civil rights legislation in '64 and even '65 with the Voting Rights Bill, refused last year to vote for civil rights legislation because it dealt with an issue applicable to the North, the whole housing question. And this, it seems to me, was the greatest expression of the hypocrisy of many of our citizens and many of the senators and congressmen of the North.
Dr. King was talking about Democrats. Yes, Republicans expressed their racism. They were vocal, visual, while many Democrats in the North in particular, they scoffed. They lamented about the woes of the South, while at the same time, passing racist legislation themselves. They were okay with black people voting. They were not okay with black people having equal opportunity in housing. Those were Democrats who opposed that legislation. The reality is Dr. King was an equal opportunity ass kicker. If you were on the wrong side of the policy, you were on the wrong side of him. You must respect a man who had so much courage that he was willing to, at times, disagree with his own base of support in order to hold them accountable to a leadership standard that would help progress the black community and, by extension, historically marginalized people. Let's be very clear about why 95% of Americans love him today. Tuesday marks in American history. This is the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., legend, a hero, and icon. The civil rights leader was shot and killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. This was in 1968. We look forward to continuing to build on the nonviolent practitioners through the King Center. Very serious about that work and creating a beloved community, said Dr. Bernice King, who happens to be a dear friend of mine. My father said that nonviolence is the pathway. I agree. To this day, Dr. King remains widely regarded as one of the greatest nonviolent leaders in history. He spearheaded the civil rights movement from the mid-1950s until his assassination. Several events are scheduled across Atlanta to honor the civil rights leader, including a candid conversation about economic inequality. Also planned is the decades-long tradition, the wreath-laying ceremony at by Dr. King's immediate family. My ancestors, great-grandfather, grandfather, father, and mother made a mark in this city, and I hope I will be able to continue the legacy Dr. Bernice King told Fox 5 News. Over the weekend, the new statue of Dr. King was unveiled in the historic Rodney Cook Sr. Peace Park. The statue is a visual representation of the iconic "I have been to the mountaintop" speech delivered the day before he was killed. I'm about to get into some statistics about Dr. King and how people in this country actually perceived his message, his legacy, his platform, and his philosophy. But before I do that, let me make sure I say this clearly. You see, they are still giving us statues. There's nothing wrong with a statue. But when a statue has been allowed to take place of a statute, that is a problem. When a statue will get a celebration and all of a sudden we no longer push for the policy that the statue should represent, that is a problem. You know, there are some politicians who will literally say behind closed doors, give those Negroes a statue of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That'll keep them quiet for 10 years. Don't allow the game to be played on you. As I said, statues, not bad. Holidays, not bad. But when they take place of the original idea, which was to give a better policy to those who have been disenfranchised in this country by way of design, that's when it becomes bad. Let me give you the stats. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights leader, American hero. Almost every American adult, 95%, they actually believe Dr. King was good for the nation. This is according to a CBS News polling. The last Gallup poll to ask about the popularity during his lifetime was taken in 1966. Found his unfavorable rating was 63%. You do realize that's higher than Donald Trump's. This included 39% of Americans who gave him a -5 rating. The worst rating in the system or the scale was -5. Almost 40% of Americans said he was the worst American in the United States of America at that time. There's more. In the middle of 1964, when Congress was in the midst of passing many of the landmark civil rights laws we currently have, King's favorable rating was only 44%. His unfavorable was basically equal at 38%. When Americans were asked which 3 Americans they had the least respect for in 1964, the Gallup poll came back. King came in second with 42%. This was barely less than 47% registered by George Wallace, a segregationist, a racist governor of Alabama. Only 17% mentioned King's name when asked which 3 Americans they had the most respect for during his time. Perhaps even more revealing is that a lot of white Americans thought King was doing more harm than good for the fight for civil rights. In a 1966 Harris poll, 50% of white Americans indicated that he was actually hurting civil rights. A mere 36% said he was helping. King's favorable rating among them was 27%, 1966. It was Dr. King who said he believed America was more racist than he ever imagined. It was Dr. King who said that it's one thing to sit where you want to sit in a restaurant, it's another thing to own it. It was Dr. King who said the universal basic income is going to be required in order to correct the economic injustices that have been done to Black people and historically marginalized communities. It was Dr. King who stood up for these principles. Now, you may not have heard some of these sayings. You may not have heard some of those speeches. You may not have heard those interviews. Why? Because the curation of Dr. King has been selectively given to you in order for you to digest Dr. King. The reason why 95% of Americans love Dr. King today, because he's not here anymore. But if he was, I guarantee you, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, the Donald Trumps of the world would not be friendly to a Dr. King. So when they tell you they support King, or when they say we celebrate the principles of King, understand they do not celebrate his platform, his policy, nor his stance as it relates to advocacy for people. All right. Sharon, thoughts here.
And Doc, you can't celebrate him and support him and try to erase him at the same time, because they're
Right.
doing that as well. Dr.
Yeah.
King taught us that you have to make a choice. What's important to you, being liked, in vogue? If that's important to you, you can't lead, you can't go where you're supposed to go. And I think he taught us something else. It's a question you got to ask yourself, Doc. Do you want to be liked? Do you mind being disagreed with? If you do, then you're not going to be leading, and you're not going to embody what this great man, 39 years old,
Yep.
gave us all.
That's right. He was so young. We forget the context of his age, given the impact of his legacy. Only 39 years of age, making that kind of legacy because he was uncompromised when it came to his leadership.